What's up, YouTube? In this video, we're going to learn how to create this dynamic trailing images effect with Webflow. And so a friend of mine asked me how to build this out recently, and I thought it was a really cool thing to try. So we'll walk through how to create this together. So the first thing I have here is basically this section with just a container in it. The container has a min height of 100 VH, but that part's not too important. So what we were going to do inside of this is we need a div to hold all of the images we're going to create. Every time we move our mouse, we want to create a new image, and we want it to be wherever our cursor is. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in a div, and I'll go ahead and give this a class of interaction, and I'll call this visual. While we scroll throughout the whole screen. So I'll give this div a height of 100 VH, and this is where all the images are going to go. Now, inside of that, I'm going to have another div, and we'll call this something like interaction template. And this can just be set to display none. We're not actually going to do anything with this. But inside of it is where we'll have basically our template of what we want the image to look like, so that every time we create a new image, we can actually clone that template, and we don't have to reapply the styles to every new image we create. We can style it natively in Webflow. So I'm going to call this something like interaction, and I'll call this something like image wrap. And usually we would have to plot, like say we move our cursor right here, we would have to find how many pixels from the left of the screen is our cursor, how many pixels from the top of the screen is our cursor. And then if we want the image to be in the center of the cursor, we would also have to figure out the width and height of the image. So I don't want to have to do all that math. I want to make this really simple. So what I'm going to do instead is give this div a width and a height of 0 pixels. And so that way I can always make this div fall exactly where my cursor is. And then inside of this div, I'm going to center the image that's inside of it. So I don't have to worry about that math. It's just going to be there set for me. And I'll also want to set this div to relative so that I can have an absolute image inside. So now I'll go ahead and drop my image element. I'll give this something like interaction image can be the class. And I can't use a % width here because the parent div has 0 pixel width and height. So this is going to need maybe a viewport width. I can say 30 viewport width, and it needs a max width of none. That way it's not forced to stay 0 pixels. And I can also I'll go ahead and apply just an example image to this for now. And actually let me take the template and let's take that off of display none just for now so we can see it. And actually, let's grab this whole visual wrap and just censor that just for the time being, and we'll remove that later. So here we have that image wrap, and it's 0 pixel width and height, and inside it is a centered image here. And I can set that to don't shrink or grow if I want. I could set it to absolute just to make sure it stays the right size. I could give it some border radius. I might want to back that down a little bit. I might want to give this an aspect ratio. I might do something like portrait or something like that. And one other thing I want to do is when we clone this image, we're going to want to replace the URL of it every time we do that. So by default, Webflow creates a bunch of URLs for each image to optimize it for different screen size. So it might create like a 500 pixel wide version and a 300 pixel wide version. We want to disable that so it only has one URL on each image. And that way it's easier to just replace that URL and change out the image every time. So now that we have that set, I'm going to change this template. Well, actually, let me back down the size of this a little bit. I'm just feeling like it's kind of large. That might be better. Let's go ahead and set the template to display none. And that way we don't see this, this template image wrap inside. It's hidden. And I'll also set the visual wrap. I'll remove the flex from it so that that template is right there in the top corner of that visual wrap. And I'll go ahead and move that above the container. So now that we have that set, we need to know what images do we want to cycle through while we're moving our mouse. And to do that, I'll drop in a div, and I'm going to build this static, but it could also work with collection list either way. So I'll give this a class of something like interaction CMS wrap, This is a class we'd apply to the CMS wrapper if we had a collection here. Inside of that, I'll have an interaction CMS list for a collection list. Inside that, I'll have an interaction CMS item. And inside that, I'll have an image element. And the only purpose of this image is to store the images that we want to cycle through. So again, I'm going to check disable responsiveness, so I only have one URL for each image. Then I'll just go ahead and choose this first image here, and I don't even need like a class or anything on this because I'm just grabbing the URL of this image and I'm applying it to our template image that has all the nice stylings and the border radius and everything. So what I'll go ahead and do is duplicate this image until we have 5 of them, and I'll just change it out. In the real world, we would probably just link this to a collection and call it a day, but for now, I'll just build it static so we can see. And I'll go ahead and replace this one. And let's also go ahead and replace this one. So now that we have that set, what I'll do is grab the CMS wrap and I'll set that to a display of none. We don't actually need to be able to see it or anything inside it. We're just going to be cycling through those images. And that's really all we need. So we have this position fixed sort of div that's staying with us while we scroll. Inside of that, we're going to be adding new images every time we move our mouse. We're going to use the div inside of this template as our template whenever we move our images. And that's really everything. So what I've gone ahead and done inside of page settings is I've added the GSAP library. We don't need scroll trigger or anything for this, just GSAP. And I've linked up a Slater file. I'm going to write my code inside slater.app for this. So let me just go ahead and save and publish, and we can start writing our code. So what I want this to do is work with, say we have multiple of these interaction wraps throughout different sections for it throughout our site. I would want this to work with multiple instances. So the first thing I like to do with any interaction is to copy the class of the whole section or containing block. And I like to loop through each instance of this so I know it'll work with multiple if I need. So we'll start by doing interaction wrap.each. And this is just going to loop through each section wrap we have. And then we want to find the elements inside this section that we're going to be using. So one thing I know I'll be using is this visual wrap because this is where I want my images to go. So I'll say anytime I move my mouse inside of this section, I'm going to say let visual wrap equal this section I'm currently looping through, and I want to find the visual wrap that's inside of this specific section. And then we want to grab our template. So our template is going to be this basically image wrap. So if I go ahead back to the code, I'll say let template equal this, .find, and we'll find the only image wrap we'll have on the page at the time. So that's good. And then we could trigger this on mouse move of the whole page. So to do that, any kind of event, we would do document, for instance, and we do on, and this is where we can do like click, on focus, or any jQuery event, mouse enter, mouse leave, but I'll do mouse move, which means it's constantly running while we're moving our cursor. And we'll say open this function up. So this runs if we're moving our cursor anywhere on the page, but in my case, I want to keep this interaction contained to one specific section. So if I'm hovering within this section, it should create images, and if I move my mouse outside of this section, no images should be created. So we're looping through each section here. What we'll do is replace document with this, so it refers back to this section that we're currently looping through. And then we want to be able to figure out where our cursor is on the page. So into the function, we can pass E, which stands for event. And then inside of that, I can do console.log E, and it will just give me all the information about this event that I could possibly want to know. So if I right click and inspect, and I head over to the console, notice every time I move my cursor, it's creating or logging out an event. And there's different things inside of this event like the client X or page X. And this page X and page Y, it tells me how far my cursor is from the left and the top of the screen. So if I wanted to save that, I could do something like, I'll create a variable and I'll say let x position equal e dot page x, and then I'll say let y position, and I'll say equal e dot page y. And that way I have these saved. How far is my cursor from the left and top of the screen? So then what I want to do is we have the template element right here, and we'll want to create a new image. So I'll say let image wrap, and what we're going to do is grab this template that we created, the only one that was on the page, and then we're going to clone it, which will make a brand new instance of it, and then we'll do append to, which will just paste it into whatever we want, and I'm going to paste it into the visual wrap, that fixed div. So every time we move our mouse, we're creating a new image, which is a clone of that original one, and we're putting it in that visual wrap. And then what we want to be able to do is set the position of this image to match our cursor position. So what I can do first of all is I'll start by creating a timeline. I'll say let TL equal gsap.timeline, because I'm going to want to animate this new image in and also set its position and just all that stuff. So every time I move my mouse, I'm creating a new image, creating a new timeline, and I'll say TL.set, and we'll set this new image that we just created called image wrap. We'll go ahead and set it on the, we'll start with, I guess, X for now, and we'll set its X to be wherever our cursor was. So X position, and let's go ahead and save that and just see if I refresh here. So notice, like, this is kind of wild, but I'm moving my cursor and it's creating like a ton of new images, and it's getting super buggy. So we probably want to change that. But every time I move my cursor, it's creating a new image and it's placing it on the X position of where my cursor is. Let's go ahead and animate this image. So I'll do a TL.from2, and we'll do from to on the image wrap. And we want to animate it maybe from an opacity of 0 and maybe from like a scale of 0.5. And then we'll animate it to opacity 1, and let's also say a scale of 1, something like that. And then I'll give it like a stronger ease, like we'll do ease of, I don't know, power 1. We can say power 3 out maybe. So it's just a stronger ease out on that. And then after that, we want to do TL.to, and I'll grab the image wrap, and then I'll go ahead and find the actual image element inside of that div. And on this, we could do something like maybe we fade it back down to opacity 0 after we fade it up. And maybe we do something like on the Y, I'll push it down 8 rem or something, so it like slides down when it goes out. And I can give this whatever duration I want. I might try a tighter duration. Something like that should be good. So we still are going to run into the issue where, see, I'm moving my cursor. It's creating a new image. That image is scaling up, fading out. This is so wild. But we're getting like a ton of new images inside this image wrap. I'm kind of afraid to open it, honestly. So every time I'm moving my cursor, it is like adding a new image to this image wrap, and the list just goes down and down, and it's just keep going. So this is going to make our site pretty heavy, pretty fast. What I could do is do an onComplete of this whole GSAP timeline. So once we're finished fading the image up and then sliding it down, we will grab the image wrap and we will remove it, which deletes it from the page. So this will only run, thanks to GSAP onComplete, it'll only run after the image slides down and it's completely out of view. And that way, I think this is going to make the performance much better. But if we check out, so this is our template, this is the visual wrap. Every time I move my cursor, it's creating an image. Those images are being added, but then watch, they get deleted one by one by one from that image wrap or from the visual wrap. So that is looking much better. Now, on the y-axis, we do want to move it down. And what we could try is this is where we're setting the X position. We could try and set Y to be the Y position, so the position of our cursor at the time. And if I save that, it's kind of like not working. So you'll see it's kind of down here at the bottom. And the reason for that, let me go ahead and console.log. Let's console.log e.page y instead. So if my cursor is right here at the top of the screen, it's logging 0 pretty much because it's at the top. And when my cursor's down here at the bottom of the screen, it's logging whatever the screen height is. So these images are perfectly lining up when I'm in this first section. But the further I scroll down the page, the more misaligned they get. And that's because it's now, if I scroll down here, or if I hover down here, notice that large number, like 1,400 pixels. So it's not actually calculating how far my cursor is from the top of the current screen. It's calculating how far is my cursor from the top of the whole page. So the further I scroll down the page, the more misaligned this is going to get. So the way we can fix that is right in here where we're setting the position of the image to be how far is our cursor from the top of the whole page. And we'll do minus something like E, or I guess it would be something like window scroll Y, which if we do scroll Y, this just tells us how far have we scrolled down the page. So if I were to just run this in the console real quick, see it says I've scrolled down by 1,026 pixels, and then my cursor is 1,400 pixels from the top of the page. So I'm subtracting my scroll distance from how far my cursor is, and that way it's just always going to line up no matter how far I scrolled. So that's a little hack we can do to make sure it's actually looking at distance from the top of the screen versus top of the page. And now even if I'm scrolled down here, it's all perfectly lined up. This is still insane, so we're going to need to be able to limit it a little bit. So what we will want to do is probably track how far has our cursor moved since the last time. So what we will need to do is maybe create something like the X position of 0 and let Y position equal 0. And then what we'll do when we move our mouse is we'll update the value of those things. So basically we're storing X and Y of 0, and then every time we move our mouse, we're updating this value to the current position of our cursor. So what that will allow us to do is we can track how far has our cursor moved since last time. So we can say something like if, and let me open this up. Let's move all this into this if statement. So we can say something like if X position, this is Y position. Let's start with X position. If X position, and we can say maybe minus E.page X. So where was our cursor last time? Maybe it was 100 pixels from the left of the screen. And then where is our cursor right now? Maybe it's 50 pixels from the left of the screen. So if we do 100 pixels minus the 50 pixels, that means there's a 50 pixel difference from where our cursor was last time to where our cursor is right now. So we can say if that value is, maybe if it's greater than 50 pixels, or maybe we'll say 100 pixels, or whatever we want that distance to be. So that way we're only running this every so often. Maybe when our cursor crosses 100 pixels of distance, then we create a new image instead of like every single pixel we move, it's creating a new image. So we can kind of limit it that way. The only thing we have to take into account here is what if our cursor last time was somewhere here at 100 pixels and we move this way, our cursor is now at 50 pixels. So in that case, we would have a negative number here. So what we can do to solve for that is do math.abs, and that's just an absolute number. So basically, if we're doing 50 minus 100, that's negative 50. If we do 100 minus 50, that's positive 50. Either way, it's going to make sure whatever that result ends up being, it's always positive. So we really just want to know, regardless of if we moved our cursor to the left or to the right, we want to know if the distance between those two was greater than 100. We're not worried if it was negative 100 or positive 100. So this just makes sure we're always dealing with a positive number. And this will only work if we're moving our cursor left and right by 100 pixels. Now this is the only time it would trigger our interaction. But we also want this to work if we move our cursor up or down by 100 pixels. So to solve for that, we can say if the distance between where we were and where we are now is greater than 100 pixels on the X, and we can just copy all this and do the same exact thing. If the distance between the previous Y position and the current Y position, and do the same thing, is greater than 100. So if we move greater than 100 pixels left and right or up and down, either way, then we create a new image. So if I were to go ahead and save this and come back over here, now this effect is much more manageable. So it's not quite as crazy. If I move 100 pixels up, it'll create a new image, or down, and we could really do whatever we want there. Now, the only other thing we really need to do is make sure that we're getting a new image in every time. Oops, why is that triggering right there? Oh, I know why it is. It's because of this visual wrap is technically inside of the section. So when I hover here, it thinks that I'm hovering on this section. So what I actually need to do is set the visual wrap to events none. That way it's not clickable. And then when I hover off this section, it should actually treat it as a hover off. This visual wrap was fixed across every section, and that was what was causing the issue. So setting that visual wrap to events none should solve that. And now if I hover and then I come up here, perfect, it's gone. All right, so that is good. Let's change out our images. So we are going to need our collection items, which are these guys, CMS item, and we want to find only the CMS items inside this section. So I'll say let CMS item equal this section dot find CMS items. And then what we can do is we want to create a function that can cycle through these items. So I can say let active item equal, let's say equal CMS item dot first. So we'll make our first item be the active item by default. Then I can create a function where I'm doing something like get next URL or something like that. And so what I would want to do is say let active item equal whatever or actually we've already created active item up here. So we're going to update the active item to be whatever the active item previously was dot next. So it'll just grab the next item in the list. But the only thing we need to account for with that is what if we were on the last item in the list and there is no next item. So to figure that out, or to solve for that, we can say if we'll say active item dot length is equal to 0. So if there is no next item in this list, then we'll update the active item to be the CMS item dot first, to be the first item in the list. And that's how we can create an infinite loop. So every time we hover in, we're going to say update the active item to be the next CMS item in the list. And then if there is no next CMS item in the list, change the active item back to being the first item in the list. So it just loops infinitely. And then once we have that set, we'll just want to get the URL of the image inside that item. So I'm going to return from this function. So every time I run it, I can just make it give me a URL. And I'll say active item, whatever that item ends up being, dot find img. So it'll find the image, and then get the attribute, because on any image, if we look here, there's like, where are my images? Here they are. Basically, src, source, is an attribute that stores the URL to that image there. anything's an attribute inside these tags. So class is an attribute, ID would be an attribute, href on a link would be an attribute. So like we can really get any attribute. And in this case, we're interested in the source attribute. So we'll say get the source, the URL of that image inside of our item. And so we'll go ahead and save that. And now what we can do is we have this image wrap that we just cloned, and we've added it inside the visual wrap here. So we can say image wrap dot find image. We want to find the image element that's inside of that, and we want to set the source attribute on that image to be whatever the next image URL is. So that way, every time we run this, it will just get the next image. That's also like updating our active items so that this stays in sync. And that's good to go. So let's just save it, refresh here, and every time we hover, we are getting a new image. It's looping infinitely, and that is good to go. So yeah, I think that's really everything we need to build this out. I already have the clonable up for this effect on webflow.com/tricks. So definitely check that out. Let me just see if there's any questions or comments so far. Someone said, wouldn't a time limit be better? A time limit. Oh, instead of a distance limit yeah, I think that could potentially work too. Like maybe every X number of seconds create a new image as opposed to a distance limit. Yeah, definitely something I should try. Cool. Anything else? Any other questions about anything we did so far? If not, that's totally fine. Cool. Yeah, that really doesn't take too much code to do something like this, which is nice. Awesome. Well, great. Thanks everyone for joining the stream. I hope to see you at the next one. Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you. Have a great one. Goodbye.